In a world where trust is nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion, every bond becomes a potential weapon. Behind polished smiles and fragile promises, darker forces move silently, pulling invisible strings that shape the destinies of those who dare to believe. This story is not about heroes or villains, it is about people trapped in a game too vast to control, where betrayal cuts deeper than any blade, and where love itself becomes the most dangerous battlefield. As the night unfolds, loyalties fracture, hidden motives surface, and each character finds themselves cornered, forced to confront their own demons. What begins as a quiet unraveling of trust quickly turns into a storm that no one can escape. Under the weight of the night, the truth was no longer a small crack, it was a devastating collapse swallowing everything that had ever been called trust. Eva stood frozen, her eyes wide in the dark void as the puzzle pieces of the grand scheme closed around her like a noose. Tomas was speechless, not because he lacked words, but because his throat felt strangled by the creeping chill of betrayal. In their minds, every memory, every promise, every touch that once felt real now twisted into part of an elaborate deception. They realized they had never truly held their fate. They were pieces, positioned perfectly, moved step by step across a board of power designed by someone else. Tomas had always believed that loyalty could save everything. He had stood by Eva not because he was forced to but because he had blindly trusted in something good. But the moment he saw how he had been manipulated like a puppet, a silent rage rose inside him, seeping into every vein, every heartbeat. He began to look at everything differently, including Eva. Doubt took root like a thorn. Did she know about this? Had their closeness been real, or was it another layer of betrayal? Those questions quietly drove a wedge between them, colder and sharper than any spoken word. Eva felt no less tortured. Her mind was a battlefield, no gunfire, no blood, just the clash between a trust she once held and a truth that crushed everything. She wanted to believe Tomas, to believe they were victims together, not traitors to each other. But the chill in his eyes, the sudden silences, the unfinished sentences told her otherwise. Doubt was a poison, spreading fast, warping every memory. This plot wasn't just a trick, it was a web spun long ago, waiting patiently for the right moment to tighten. Eva and Tomas were not simply fighting unseen forces, they were being forced to fight themselves, their weaknesses, their choices, their past decisions that now bled into the present. Meanwhile, in a distant corner of the same collapsing world, Kat prepared for a night that could change everything. She stood before a mirror, adjusting every detail as if perfect appearance could command destiny. But deep down, she knew no one could control a storm once it began. She wasn't dressing for a party, she was preparing for a turning point. Kat had always believed she held the strings. Every move on the board, every piece in play, she thought it was hers to command. But tonight, the air felt thick, suffocating, warning her of an approaching chaos far bigger than she could contain. Every step she took, every glance at the mirror whispered a truth she didn't want to admit: the night would either crown her or destroy everything she built. Kat didn't fear chaos itself, she feared chaos beyond her control. In another shadowed corner of the city, Nicole and Ted faced each other not as lovers but as strangers bound by the rotting remnants of their past. Leslie's return wasn't just a reopening of old wounds, it was a blade slicing straight through what little held them together. A love once built on tenderness had become shards, sharp, dangerous, unrecognizable. Nicole had once held Ted's heart with ease. She had been the safe harbor. But now, when his eyes met hers, all she saw was distance. Leslie's presence tore open wounds that had never truly healed. It wasn't that Leslie was stronger, it was that Nicole finally saw how love had transformed into something brittle and cold. She wasn't only jealous of Leslie, she was jealous of the past, of the version of herself Ted once loved unconditionally. Ted was caught between two tides, a past full of pain and a present collapsing under its own weight. He no longer recognized the woman standing before him. Love hadn't disappeared overnight, it had eroded, silently, over countless silences, arguments, and every reminder Leslie's return brought. And Leslie's return was no accident. It was calculated. She knew their weak points, the exhaustion, the fractures never healed, the secrets swept under years of silence. She didn't need to attack directly, her presence alone was enough to set everything on fire. Nicole began to lose her grip, becoming volatile and fragile. Ted spiraled between regret and the desperate urge to escape. Amid these personal wars, a larger plot loomed like a storm cloud. Eva and Tomas were cornered by a force they couldn't yet name. Kat stood on the edge of a night that could either grant her power or strip her bare. Nicole and Ted were sinking into the ruins of a love that had died but hadn't yet been buried. As everything reached a boiling point, each of them was forced to choose, fight back or be devoured. Eva's anger simmered beneath the surface, not just at the shadowy figure pulling the strings, but at Tomas, who had sworn to protect her but had let her fall into the trap. Tomas, torn between rage and guilt, knew that parts of this conspiracy were born from choices he once thought harmless. Kat began to suspect her own alliances. She understood this wasn't just another game of power but a night when betrayal would be laid bare. If she didn't strike first, she would be the prey. Nicole and Ted, however, weren't fighting for power anymore, they were fighting to keep from drowning, trying to breathe in the suffocating air of a house that was no longer a home. And when the night finally closed in, the bonds that tied them all together had been stretched to the breaking point. Eva and Tomas were no longer lovers bound by trust. Kat was no longer the silent puppeteer. Nicole and Ted were no longer a couple that had promised to withstand everything. Each of them, alone in their private darkness, began to shape decisions that would ignite the war to come. The conspiracy was no longer outside. It had seeped inside them, tearing trust apart, twisting emotions, turning sacred bonds into battlefields. In that moment, the enemy wasn't hidden anymore. It was them, the ones who once loved each other, who once trusted, but were now willing to push each other into the abyss just to survive. As the final echoes of chaos faded into the cold night, everything that once held meaning had turned into dust and silence. The grand web of lies, carefully woven over months, perhaps even years, finally collapsed under its own weight. For a moment, the world stood still, as if holding its breath to witness the aftermath of a war that had no victors. Betrayal had scorched every bridge, and trust, once so easily given, now lay shattered in pieces too small to ever be rebuilt. Every glance carried the weight of what had been lost, friendships, love, innocence, and the naive belief that the truth would somehow set them free. Bill stood alone beneath the dim streetlight, the pale glow outlining the exhaustion carved into his face. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the unbearable knowledge of everything that had transpired. Danny's absence was like a wound that refused to close, bleeding silently into the night. Haley, too, had disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind only unanswered questions and the bitter taste of betrayal. Joey's last look still burned in Bill's memory, a chilling reminder that some people would rather destroy everything than lose control. The city no longer felt alive. It was a graveyard of secrets, each one whispering the names of those who had fallen victim to their own ambition. The storm had passed, but what remained was not peace, it was the hollow silence after a scream. And yet, in that silence, something fragile stirred. A truth, painful but unbreakable, had been unearthed. Bill knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The lies had changed him, carved out a part of his soul that could never be restored. But beneath the ruins, there was a strange clarity, a cruel, cold understanding of the world and the people in it. He had survived the fire, but at a price so high it left him hollow. As the wind carried away the last remnants of the night, Bill turned his back on the place where everything had ended. There would be no going back, no redemption, no easy answers. Only the long road ahead, paved with scars and silence. The game was over, but the shadows it left behind would follow them all, forever.